You know, it's a curious thing when a person begins to wake up, when they really see that life is not a cage but a dance. The world around them does something very peculiar. Instead of celebrating that discovery, most people recoil. They frown. They say, "What's happened to you? You've changed." And of course, they're right, you have. Freedom, you see, has a very odd effect on those who have not yet tasted it. It doesn't inspire them at first. It threatens them. It shakes the foundations of all the little games they've been taught to take so seriously. Because freedom is contagious. And for the mind still imprisoned by its own seriousness, that contagion feels like chaos. When you stop struggling to be someone, when you cease performing your role in the social theater, the actors around you suddenly feel as though you've forgotten your lines. They whisper behind the curtain, "He's gone strange. She's not trying anymore." But what they really mean is, this person is no longer cooperating with the collective hallucination. Now, the fascinating thing about awakening is that it is not an act of rebellion, it's simply seeing through. You discover that all this effort to control, to manage, to impress, was never required in the first place. But from the perspective of the sleeping world, that looks like irresponsibility. They see stillness and call it laziness. They see gentleness and call it weakness. They see non-attachment and call it apathy. Yet what's really happening is that the awakened man or woman has simply stopped pretending. They no longer act as if the game were ultimate. They can play. Of course, they can smile, shake hands, pay bills, fall in love, but they play knowingly. They do not mistake the play for the player. And that is what troubles those who still believe the play is real. Imagine you are at a masquerade ball. Everyone is wearing elaborate masks, each more ornate than the last. The conversations are all about the masks who has the most beautiful, the most powerful, the most tragic. Then suddenly, someone takes theirs off. They're still smiling, still polite, but the moment they remove that mask, the whole room stiffens. Because in that instant, everyone is reminded it was never about the mask at all. Freedom, you see, is not just the ability to walk away from the crowd, it's the recognition that the crowd was never a prison. And yet, for those who depend upon the crowd for their sense of self, that realization feels like betrayal. It feels as though you've broken some sacred code of belonging, but you haven't broken anything. You've simply stopped believing that chains are jewelry. And so, the strange reaction to freedom is that people may call you detached, aloof, even arrogant, but in truth, you've just stopped mistaking noise for music. The rhythm of your being has changed. You no longer dance to the frantic beat of validation, but to the quiet pulse of awareness itself. And when that happens, those still lost in the noise will feel discomfort. They must, because the silence you radiate holds up a mirror to their restlessness. Yet this is not your doing. You are not causing their reaction. You are simply showing what freedom looks like when it forgets to hide. That is the paradox. The freer you become, the more your presence unsettles those who are still busy trying to be free. They sense, unconsciously, that your peace cannot be controlled, and control is all the ego knows how to love. So, you see, it isn't that awakened people offend others, they simply reveal the joke too early. And most of the world hasn't yet reached the punchline. You see, the ego is a very anxious little creature. It lives by comparison, by measuring itself against what it imagines others to be. It cannot rest because its sense of existence depends upon maintaining an image, and images by their nature are fragile things. The ego says, I am this and therefore I must not be that. It draws lines everywhere, between good and bad, successful and failed, superior and inferior. But beneath all those boundaries lies one fundamental fear. If I stop defining myself, will I still exist? Now, most people never quite articulate this fear. They don't walk around saying, I'm terrified of non-being. But that's what it is. It's the underlying hum of anxiety that keeps the entire social machine running, the need to prove, to display, to be seen, because the ego feels alive only in contrast. And so, when it meets someone who no longer plays that game, it feels profoundly disturbed. The ego thrives on resistance. It needs an opposite pole, like a magnet needs another end to attract or repel. When you cease to resist or to conform, the ego loses its point of reference. It stands before you like an actor whose scene partner has suddenly gone silent. You may have noticed this. When you refuse to engage in petty drama, when you simply smile instead of defending yourself, people sometimes grow angry. They call you evasive or uncooperative. But what's really happening is that the ego senses it can no longer control the narrative. The ego's primary tool is control. Control through approval, through guilt, through fear, through charm. It is a clever manipulator, and it always pretends that its intentions are noble. It says, I only want what's best for you, or I just care about how this looks, or I'm only trying to help. Yet beneath every phrase is the same impulse. Please, react to me. Let me know that I exist. It's rather like a person shouting into a canyon. The ego cries, echo, and waits to hear itself come back. But when it meets stillness, when the awakened one simply listens without echoing, the sound falls flat, and the ego begins to tremble. That trembling, that panic, is what we often see in those who are driven to control others. Because control is not strength, it's fear dressed in armor. The narcissist, in this sense, is just a person who has built their entire identity upon that armor. They have mistaken the echo for the voice. And when you, by your silence or your serenity, show that the echo was never real, they feel as if you have stolen their oxygen. They must react not because you've done something wrong, but because your very presence exposes the illusion they depend upon. You see, the ego cannot survive in the same room as stillness. It will do anything to stir up movement, conflict, debate, seduction, flattery, guilt, because in motion it feels real. In silence it dissolves. And this is why the spiritually awake so often provoke the egos around them. It's not that they set out to, it simply happens naturally. A calm lake reflects the sky perfectly, and in that reflection, all the clouds of pretense are revealed. But remember, there is no need to fight the ego, neither yours nor anyone else's. Fighting only gives it new life. You cannot defeat illusion by treating it as real. You can only see through it. So when the controlling mind arises in yourself, or in another, smile gently, recognize it for what it is, a frightened child trying to steer the universe. And like a child, it will calm when it realizes it is safe, that nothing needs to be managed so desperately. Because in truth, you were never out of control. You were simply pretending to be. And the moment you stop pretending, the whole machinery of control collapses like a puppet with its strings cut. That's the end of the ego's authority, not through resistance, but through recognition. Now, it's a strange paradox, isn't it? When you become deeply present, when you no longer grasp, manipulate, or perform, many people interpret that as rejection. They say, you've become distant, or you don't care anymore. But you see, it isn't that the awakened person withdraws from others, it's that they no longer cling to them. And to an ego that survives on attachment, non-clinging looks very much like abandonment. Imagine for a moment that you have been holding someone's hand tightly, not out of affection, but out of fear, fear that they might leave, fear that you might be alone. And suddenly, that person relaxes their hand, they don't pull away, they simply stop holding so tightly. For the frightened ego, that release feels like being dropped. Presence, you see, is not withdrawal. It is relaxation into what already is. But to those still bound by tension, relaxation feels like loss. The ego lives in stories, stories of who we are, what we mean to one another, what the future must hold. Presence dissolves those stories. And in that dissolution, the ego senses its own disappearance. It says, "You're slipping away from me," when in fact nothing has moved at all. You've simply stopped pretending that relationship means possession. The spiritually awake person no longer seeks to extract identity from another. They no longer need constant reassurance, validation, or drama to feel alive. Their love, if we can call it that, becomes transparent, like sunlight passing through clear water. It nourishes without clinging. It warms without burning. And here is the subtle humor of it all. The more awake you become, the more your calmness unsettles those who equate love with noise. They say you've changed, but what they mean is, you no longer feed my illusion. Most people, when they say they want connection, are really asking for confirmation. They don't want to see you, they want to see themselves reflected in your approval. But presence doesn't play that game. Presence is like a mirror that reflects nothing but truth. And truth can be uncomfortable when you've grown attached to your masks. The narcissist, or the deeply ego-identified person, looks into that mirror and sees silence, not flattery, not admiration, not fear, just stillness. And they call that stillness rejection. But in truth, it is the first honest reflection they have ever received. It is said in the old Zen tradition, when you meet a master, they don't give you anything. They take away everything that isn't real. So too with presence. To the ego, this feels like theft. To the spirit, it feels like liberation. So when someone tells you that your calmness feels cold, don't be troubled. They are simply describing the absence of the fire that once burned them. They are learning, perhaps painfully, that warmth and dependence are not the same thing. Presence invites intimacy of a different order, not the clinging of two frightened selves, but the meeting of two spaces where nothing needs to be proven. And when you dwell in that space, you find that the most profound connection is not made by holding on, but by allowing. The flower does not grasp the bee. The tree does not cling to the bird. Each offers its presence freely. And in that freedom, harmony arises naturally. So, the next time someone says, "You've grown distant," smile kindly. What they're really noticing is that you've stopped performing the dance of insecurity. You haven't disappeared. You've simply become quiet enough to be real. To live this way is not coldness, it is clarity. And clarity, though it may sting the ego, is the purest form of love there is. You know, there's a wonderful old saying in Zen, the perfect mirror has no image. And that's exactly what begins to happen when one awakens. For most of our lives, we are mirrors filled with reflections, opinions, reactions, judgments, desires. When someone looks at us, we show them back their own image, distorted perhaps, but recognizable. That's how most people feel, seen by seeing themselves in another's eyes. But when you awaken, when you rest deeply in presence, something subtle and magnificent occurs. The mirror becomes clear. The dust of self-importance, the smudges of fear and craving, all wipe away. And suddenly, there is nothing left to reflect but emptiness, a living stillness that holds everything, yet clings to nothing. Now, this is precisely what disturbs those who are still lost in the dream of separation. When they look into such a mirror, they find no affirmation of their story. They say, "You don't understand me," when what they really mean is, "You won't play my role anymore." You see, relationship, for most people, is a subtle bargain. I will mirror your illusions if you will mirror mine. We call that harmony. But true harmony is something quite different. It is not two illusions supporting each other. It is two spaces resonating in the same silence. So when someone whose sense of self depends on being admired or feared or needed looks into the awakened one, they find no purchase, no handle to grab hold of, no reflection to reassure them that they exist. And this can feel terrifying, because to the ego, non-reflection feels like annihilation. The narcissist, the controller, the manipulator, they all feed on mirrors. They live in the constant need to be reflected back. But the awakened mirror offers them nothing but stillness. And stillness is the ego's greatest threat. It's like standing in front of a perfectly still lake at night. You throw a pebble, expecting ripples, and nothing happens. The surface absorbs it without a trace. The mind says, something's wrong with this water. But the truth is, nothing is wrong. The water has simply ceased reacting to disturbance. So too with the awakened being. They do not refuse you. They simply do not return your projections. They no longer play the part assigned to them in your drama. And to those who need drama to feel alive, that is unbearable. Now, this does not mean the awakened person has stopped loving. Quite the opposite. Their love is now unconditional, not bound by approval or guilt, not limited to personality or behavior. They see through the mask to the same consciousness behind every pair of eyes. But here's the paradox. Unconditional love often feels invisible to those who have only known conditional love. Because unconditional love doesn't flatter the ego, it liberates it. And liberation is the last thing the ego wants. When you no longer mirror back someone's false identity, they may call you heartless. But in truth, you've simply stopped feeding their hallucination. You're offering them something infinitely more precious, a clear space in which they can finally see themselves without distortion. And perhaps, in time, they will. Perhaps the shock of that emptiness will one day ripen into gratitude. Because, my friends, when the mirror stops reflecting, it begins revealing. It reveals the truth that there was never a separate image to preserve, that the face we defended so fiercely was only a mask made of mist, vanishing in the light of awareness. You don't have to polish the mirror to make it perfect. You only have to stop mistaking the reflections for reality. And when you do, when you finally let the mirror be clear and empty, you will discover something astonishing, that this emptiness is not void at all, but fullness itself, the silence in which all music happens. And in that silence, there is no narcissist, no victim, no controller, no controlled, only the stillness of consciousness, playing at being both sides of the mirror. Let's look at something rather curious. People often speak of energy vampires, those who seem to drain the life out of a room. And while we could make this sound mystical, it's actually quite ordinary. The so-called theft of energy is nothing more than attention being pulled into someone else's story. You see, every ego lives by the same subtle mechanism. It demands to be taken seriously. The moment you believe it's drama, you begin to feed it. It's like a fisherman casting bait. The bait is the complaint, the argument, the emotional storm, and the hook is your reaction. Now, when you awaken, when you see the whole performance as a kind of cosmic theater, you stop biting the bait. Not out of coldness, but because you finally understand that no one is truly catching anyone. It was all one actor switching masks and pretending to be caught. The narcissist, bless their heart, is the ego in its most theatrical costume. They are constantly auditioning for a role. The victim, the hero, the genius, the misunderstood prophet. But behind all that performance is an ache, please see me. And yet, the one who is awake can no longer play the game of pretending that the mask is the person. So what happens? The moment you no longer respond, as expected, the actor panics. The energy they once drew from you, your outrage, your sympathy, your admiration, is gone. And in that silence, they feel emptier than ever. That's when the accusations begin. You've changed. You're heartless. You don't care. These are the sounds of an ego starving for reaction. But you see, you are not responsible for feeding illusions. Energy theft, as it's often called, is not a crime of the other. It's a transaction we unconsciously agree to. Every time we take another's drama as real, we sign the contract. Every time we defend ourselves against a projection, we validate the projector. But when you awaken, you realize the most radical truth of all. You don't have to cancel the contract. Just stop signing it. The Buddha once said that holding anger is like grasping a hot coal. You burn yourself first. But we might add that catching someone's anger is like catching that coal and clutching it proudly, saying, "Look what they threw." The wise simply let it drop. The cosmic joke, of course, is that no one ever truly drains anyone. Energy cannot be stolen. It can only be misdirected. And when you refuse to direct your awareness toward falsehood, that same energy returns home, calm, undisturbed, radiant. So don't fight the energy thief. Don't condemn them. That too is a form of feeding. Simply stop playing their game. The thief cannot steal from someone who owns nothing. The awakened one has no possessions, not even a self to protect. When you live this way, you find that what once felt like theft now becomes teaching. Every attempt to pull you into drama becomes another invitation to stay still, to smile inwardly at the dance of illusion. And in that stillness, a wonderful humor arises. Because you see that all along, the thief and the victim were the same consciousness pretending to trade what was never theirs to begin with. Now, one of the greatest misunderstandings about awakening is the notion that it makes you passive, that you become some sort of spiritual doormat, letting the world trample over you while you smile blissfully. But that's not it at all. Non-resistance is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the recognition that fighting the current only exhausts the swimmer. The awakened person simply swims with the river, knowing that the flow itself is their nature. You see, the ego always wants to fight, to fix, to oppose, to conquer. It survives by friction. It needs something to push against, some problem to solve, some enemy to defeat. Without opposition, the ego evaporates. And that's precisely why non-resistance is so unsettling to it. When you refuse to resist, you take away the ego's favorite toy. You rob it of drama. It's like trying to play tug of war with someone who drops the rope. Suddenly the game collapses, and all your strength looks rather foolish. Non-resistance, then, is not inaction. It is effortless action wu wei, as the Taoists say. It's the art of allowing life to move through you, rather than insisting that you move life. A storm comes, and the stiff tree snaps in the wind. The bamboo bends, and when the storm passes, it rises again untouched. So the awakened one bends not out of fear, but because they have remembered that bending and standing are both the movements of the same root. When someone insults you, you don't need to return the insult. You can simply let it pass through you, as wind passes through an empty flute, and sometimes, if you're very quiet inside, it makes a bit of music on the way out. The secret is this: resistance multiplies what it opposes. If you fight anger with anger, you've doubled it. If you resist fear, you've already become afraid. But when you meet anger with space, fear with patience, hatred with understanding, they have nothing to cling to. This is not moral advice. It's simple physics of consciousness. You cannot struggle with illusion and expect to be free of it. You can only see it for what it is, vapor in sunlight, and then move on. You might say, but if I don't resist, won't people take advantage of me? Ah, but who is this me they could take advantage of? When you stop defending the imaginary self, there is nothing left to attack. You don't win the battle by defeating your enemies. You win by realizing there never was a battlefield. And from that realization, a new kind of strength arises, not the brittle strength of defiance, but the effortless strength of presence. The same strength that allows the ocean to carry a ship and dissolve a mountain, all without lifting a finger. So when someone tries to provoke you, or life throws its endless waves of circumstance upon your shore, remember, you are not the wave being battered, you are the sea itself. And the sea does not resist its own waves. To live without resistance is to rediscover trust, not in fate, not in chance, but in the intelligence that animates all things. It is to see that you were never separate from the flow. The current that carries the stars is the same current that breathes through you. And when you know this, you stop struggling to stay afloat. You float because you are the water. Now, there's something very subtle we must understand if we are to live freely in this world. The difference between boundaries and walls. You see, most people think that to protect themselves, they must build walls thick, tall, and impenetrable. They close their hearts, tighten their faces, and call that strength. But walls do not protect you. They imprison you. They keep the world out, yes, but they also keep you in. A boundary, on the other hand, is something entirely different. A boundary is like the skin of your body, flexible, alive, breathing. It defines your form without isolating you from life. It allows exchange, touch, and sensitivity. It says, this is where I am distinct, not this is where you end. To live with boundaries is to move like the ocean. The wave has its own curve, its own rhythm, its own crest and fall. Yet it never forgets that it is still the sea. Now, when you are spiritually awake, people often misunderstand your boundaries. Because you are no longer bound by guilt or fear, your no sounds shocking. You are no longer manipulated by flattery or obligation, and so others, still caught in those games, may call you selfish. But that isn't selfishness, it's clarity. To say no from love is to say yes to truth. You are simply honoring the natural flow of energy where it wants to move and where it does not. Imagine, for a moment, that your consciousness is like sunlight. Sunlight does not apologize for shining where it shines, nor does it chase after shadows, trying to explain itself. It simply radiates, and those who wish to stand in its warmth are free to do so. Those who prefer shade may rest there. The sun does not interfere, so it is with awakened boundaries. You do not need to defend your light, nor force it upon anyone. You can say, this space, this peace, this attention, I share it gladly, but not at the cost of my own clarity. Boundaries, then, are not rules. They are expressions of rhythm. The same way music cannot exist without pauses, your life cannot exist without spaces where you stop playing everyone else's tune and listen again to your own. And this listening, this honoring of your own tempo, is what keeps love real. Because love without boundaries quickly turns into bondage. The moment love becomes a transaction, I will give you peace if you behave as I wish, it stops being love altogether. True love, like true awareness, includes everything but clings to nothing. It lets each thing be as it is. It allows two beings to dance without stepping on each other's toes. And so, the awakened person learns to walk among people with a kind of effortless dignity. They can say yes without fear of losing themselves, and no without the slightest trace of anger. Their boundaries are invisible but unmistakable, like the fragrance of a flower that needs no sign to declare where it blooms. Now, this doesn't mean you avoid people, or that you build some philosophical bubble around yourself. On the contrary, you become more available, more compassionate, more human than ever before. But you are no longer compelled. You are moved, not pushed. You are drawn by love, not driven by fear. To live with boundaries without walls is to remember that relationship is a dance, not a tug of war. You step forward when the rhythm calls for it, and you step back when the music changes. You don't cling to your partner, you let the dance move both of you. And in that effortless movement, you find something astonishing. Freedom and intimacy are not opposites at all. They are the same gesture, seen from two sides. Freedom is love turned inward. Love is freedom turned outward. To know this is to understand the secret art of human connection, the art of being fully yourself without needing to be against anyone else. Now, at last, when you begin to see all of this clearly, the games of ego and control, the endless drama of seeking and resisting, the comedy of people trying so very hard to be real, something quite marvelous happens. You begin to laugh, and not the laugh of superiority. Oh no. It's the laughter of relief. The laughter of someone who has finally dropped the impossible task of straightening a river. You realize that all the trouble and turmoil, all the worry about who am I and what do they think of me, were nothing more than waves chasing themselves across the surface of an infinite sea. The awakened one laughs because he sees there was never anything wrong, only a magnificent misunderstanding. He sees the narcissist and the saint, the victim and the tyrant, all playing their roles in a divine comedy so intricate that even God must sometimes forget it's a joke. And you know, that's the beauty of it. Because if the play were too perfect, there would be no surprise, no adventure, no awakening at all. So consciousness in its infinite mischief decided to forget itself, to fall asleep inside a million human dreams, to pretend to be lost so that it could feel the joy of finding itself again. That's why even the so-called narcissist, even the one who hurts you, is not outside the dance. They too are the self pretending to be trapped. They too are part of the joke. And when you truly see this, your anger dissolves into compassion, not the pitying kind, but the cosmic compassion that comes from knowing there was never anyone else to forgive. The wave does not apologize to the ocean for crashing. The ocean does not resent the wave for rising. They are the same movement in different shapes. So, you see, enlightenment is not a grim business of self-improvement. It's the rediscovery of laughter. It's remembering how to play again. It's the deep relaxation of knowing that life was never a test, never a competition, never a problem to be solved. It was always a song being sung, a dance being danced. And when you see that, you no longer worry about being awakened or unawakened, spiritual or unspiritual. You just live, and in that living, truth expresses itself effortlessly. You can walk through the marketplace, sit in traffic, wash dishes, hold someone's hand, and all the while, somewhere deep inside, you are smiling, because you know that everything, from the smallest sigh to the brightest star, is consciousness delighting in its own reflection. The narcissist, the enlightened sage, the passerby in the street, all faces of the same eternal actor, bowing to itself in endless disguise. And in that moment, the burden of life dissolves into the simplest thing of all, a cosmic laughter echoing through eternity, saying, "Ah, yes, of course, it was all me, playing all along." And so, my friends, after all these words, after all the stories, mirrors, and paradoxes, what remains? Only this, a quiet smile. Because you see, the discovery of awakening is not the attainment of some great spiritual summit. It is the simple recognition that you were never climbing in the first place. You were already there. Every stumble, every sorrow, every encounter, even those that seemed painful or cruel, was part of the same divine rhythm, the same song of being echoing through itself. You are not the character struggling toward enlightenment. You are the awareness within which that story unfolds and within which it ends. When you finally see this, something softens. The need to fix the world, to save people, to prove yourself, all dissolves like mist in the morning sun. You find that compassion arises naturally, because you no longer divide the world into helpers and victims, saints and sinners. There is just the dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, always complete. And in that dance, even conflict has its music. The narcissist who seeks control, the seeker who longs for peace, both are the same consciousness, wearing different masks. They chase each other endlessly until one of them stops running and begins to laugh. That laughter, quiet, deep, genuine, is the sound of awakening. When you hear it in yourself, you stop taking life so personally. You realize that even this conversation, these words, are part of the play, the universe talking to itself, pretending to learn what it already knows. And once you know that, you can finally rest. Not in indifference, but in intimacy. Not by withdrawing from the world, but by recognizing that there is nowhere else to go. Every face you meet is your own. Every sound you hear is the one consciousness humming its eternal tune. So walk gently, speak lightly, laugh often, for the secret of life, as simple and as impossible as it may seem, is that there was never anyone here but you pretending beautifully to be everyone else. And perhaps, if you listen closely now, you can hear it, that faint, familiar echo beneath all your thoughts, the universe smiling back.